Well, Nokia is counting on more than gadgets and gizmos to revive its fortunes. The world's biggest mobile phone maker announced a tie-up with Microsoft last week as it seeks to win back customers. Well, investors aren't impressed. The stock has fallen almost 20% since last Friday, so could it fall further? Well, our next guest tracks daily short-selling data, and he says short sellers in Europe may be decreasing their positions on Nokia. Well, Duff Gordon, senior research analyst at Data Explorers, joins me now. Thank you so much again for coming in. It's quite telling because actually US investors are doing very different things to what the European ones are doing.
Yeah, so this is a sort of manna from heaven, a big fall like this in a big liquid European equity. But when you looked at the short selling, it wasn't really the European investors who were short selling the Finnish or Swedish listings of Nokia. It was more the ADR, so the US listing of Nokia. Some of the US investors, maybe because they're closer to Apple or they hadn't got any sort of subjectivity, they were short selling quite heavily in the Nokia listings in New York as opposed to over here. So I guess the European investors are playing Nokia by just not owning it. But it surprised me that there wasn't short selling in the European line, given it's not new news that Nokia is struggling a little bit with Apple doing so well.
Well, Duff Gordon, tell me about what that means for the future, because the stock price has decreased by about 15-16% actually just last week, if not 20%. What does it give us in terms of indications for what investors should do now?
The slight interesting thing is that where there's no real short base, there aren't any kind of great buyers. So there are no short sellers to take profits and be buying back Nokia shares that might lead to a kind of like a floor in this fall in Nokia, which is why it's probably fallen 15% and then down 19%. It's only just starting to come up because there aren't really that many people who are kind of like taking profits and covering and buying shares. You're going to need people to come into Nokia and say, we believe this is a turnaround story. We like the new management team. We like their new tie-up with Microsoft, and we're going to play a long game and buy shares. Those sorts of investors don't sort of come in quickly, so there's a bit of an issue for Nokia on that front.
What about some of its rivals, such as Apple? They've had a great run.
Apple, I mean, short selling is extremely rare in Apple. It's the stock market darling, and short sellers don't disagree. If you look at HTC, which is the sort of maybe the new pretender here, the Taiwanese stock there was some short selling in that. It was up at around 2%, which is quite high for a Taiwanese stock. That's since come down, so they're not. So most short sellers are pretty nervous to touch this whole sector, with the exception of Nokia's American listing.
And for Bloomberg users, they can actually look at all the short selling activity on DXPL. That's the screen behind us. Tell me what they could find, for example, on Research in Motion.
Well, you could look at the Canadian line, the US line. Actually, you'll see in both that the short selling is kind of, it occasionally appears, but at the moment it's sort of gone away a little bit. So people are not quite sure how BlackBerry fits into this whole game. But you can certainly watch the daily moves in that, as we will be doing, to see if any short sellers think that BlackBerry could be the next Nokia, or is BlackBerry going to be, continuing to hold its market share.
Well, is there anything that's been surprising you over the last couple of weeks that you've been looking at this that you can tease us about a little bit?
Well, we talked last time a little about the travel sector with the thing that was going on in Egypt.
Yeah.
You know, is it going to be quite difficult for some of the travel companies this summer? There's a little bit of short selling there, but no, it still remains a market where short selling is kind of like little bit absent, and there'll be some isolated opportunities.
Well, Duff Gordon, thank you so much from Data Explorers.